In the Nevada desert, where government secrets hide behind mountains, some frequencies broadcast messages that should never be heard. "40 miles southeast of Reno, Nevada, where the highway gives way to gravel roads, and the gravel roads fade into dust tracks, sits one of the most isolated military research facilities in the continental United States. The Walker Lake installation occupies 12 square miles of high desert basin, surrounded by ancient volcanic ridges and the alkaline waters of Walker Lake itself. Here, in Mineral County's vast emptiness, the Defense Department conducts experiments that require absolute radio silence and complete isolation from civilian interference. On the evening of March 12, 2023, Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the facility's main gate in her white Honda Accord, Nevada license plate NDV 41821. Security footage shows her presenting her Department of Defense contractor credentials to Security Officer James Chen at exactly 6:47 p.m. The timestamp would later become crucial evidence in understanding what happened during the next 17 hours. Dr. Vasquez, a 43-year-old electrical engineer specializing in experimental radar systems, had been summoned to calibrate a classified array designated only as Project Nighthawk in official documents. Her security clearance allowed access to the facility's most sensitive equipment, including the massive radar installation that dominated the center of the compound like a steel and concrete cathedral. According to the entry log, Dr. Vasquez signed standard protocols acknowledging that all electronic devices must remain in the security office during her stay. Cell phones, tablets, even digital watches were secured in individual lockers. The facility maintained what officials called electromagnetic discipline. Any device capable of transmitting or receiving signals could interfere with the delicate experiments conducted within the perimeter. Security Officer Chen later described Dr. Vasquez as appearing tired but professional during the entry process. She carried only a briefcase containing printed technical manuals and a thermos of coffee. Her vehicle was inspected and cleared for parking in the contractor lot, approximately 200 yards from the main laboratory complex. The Walker Lake installation operated under strict access protocols. The facility was divided into 3 security zones: the outer perimeter, marked by chain-link fencing and motion sensors; the inner compound, containing administrative buildings and basic laboratory equipment; and the classified core, where Project Nighthawk's radar array stood behind additional layers of security. Dr. Vasquez's clearance granted access to all 3 zones. At 8:15 p.m., surveillance cameras recorded Dr. Vasquez entering the main laboratory building. She was scheduled to work through the night, calibrating the radar array during peak atmospheric conditions that occurred between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. The work required precise timing. The desert's temperature inversion during these hours created optimal conditions for testing the array's long-range detection capabilities. By 11:47 p.m., security logs showed Dr. Vasquez had completed her initial diagnostic procedures and was beginning the primary calibration sequence. Officer Chen, conducting his hourly perimeter check, observed lights in the laboratory complex and noted everything appeared normal in his shift report. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Dr. Elena Vasquez alive. Sometime between 11:47 p.m. on March 12th and dawn on March 13th, she vanished from one of the most secure facilities in Nevada. What happened during those dark hours at the Walker Lake installation would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about security protocols. Advanced technology and the possibility of vanishing without a trace from a facility designed to prevent exactly that scenario. At 5:53 a.m. on March 13, 2023, Security Officer James Chen began his dawn patrol of the Walker Lake installation. The ritual was routine after 8 years on the job. Check the perimeter sensors, inspect the vehicle compound, verify all buildings were secure, and confirm that overnight personnel had completed their assigned tasks safely. Chen's first indication that something was wrong came at the main laboratory building. The entry log showed Dr. Vasquez had badged in at 8:15 p.m. the previous evening, but no corresponding exit record existed. More concerning, the laboratory's interior lights were still on, but the building appeared empty. Inside the control room for Project Nighthawk, Chen discovered an abandoned workstation. Dr. Vasquez's briefcase sat open on the central console, technical manuals spread across the surface. Her thermos of coffee remained half full, still warm to the touch. But Dr. Vasquez herself was nowhere to be found. The radar array's control systems displayed a series of error messages that Chen had never seen during his tenure at the facility. Diagnostic screens showed electromagnetic readings that spiked far beyond normal operational parameters sometime around 2:30 a.m. The equipment had automatically entered safe mode, shutting down the primary array and switching to backup systems. At 6:07 a.m., Chen radioed facility supervisor Captain Margaret Torres with a code yellow, personnel unaccounted for during shift change. Torres arrived within minutes and immediately initiated emergency protocols. Every building was searched, every security zone was cleared, and every piece of surveillance footage was queued for review. The search revealed the most disturbing discovery 3 miles northeast of the facility. Dr. Vasquez's white Honda Accord, license plate NDV 4th 1821, was found on a dirt access road that led toward the shores of Walker Lake. The engine was still running. The driver's side door stood open. The keys dangled from the ignition. Inside the vehicle, investigators found Dr. Vasquez's purse, containing her wallet, identification, and $247 in cash. Her jacket hung on the passenger seat headrest. A half-eaten energy bar sat in the cup holder. Everything suggested she had stepped out of the car momentarily and planned to return immediately. But the vehicle's location made no sense according to facility protocols. The access road was outside the security perimeter, in an area where Dr. Vasquez had no authorized business. More puzzling, the road led to terrain that was impossible to navigate in darkness without specialized equipment. The alkaline flats near Walker Lake were treacherous even in daylight, riddled with soft spots and hidden channels carved by flash floods. Security footage from the facility's perimeter cameras showed no record of Dr. Vasquez leaving the compound. The electromagnetic sensors that monitored every entrance and exit had detected no unauthorized movement during the night. According to the facility's security systems, Dr. Vasquez had never left the installation. Yet her car was found 3 miles away, engine running, as if she had driven there moments before discovery. At 7:45 a.m., Captain Torres made the call that would transform a missing person case into a federal incident. Within 2 hours, 3 black SUVs with government plates arrived at the Walker Lake installation. The vehicles carried personnel from agencies that Torres was not authorized to identify in her subsequent reports. The federal response team immediately classified the incident under national security provisions. All facility personnel were restricted to base pending individual interviews. All security footage was confiscated for analysis at undisclosed locations. All communication about the incident was prohibited under penalty of federal prosecution. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a contractor colleague who had worked with Dr. Vasquez on previous projects, later described the federal response as unnaturally swift and comprehensive. Within 6 hours of the discovery, the installation was effectively sealed from outside contact. Local law enforcement, including the Mineral County Sheriff's Office, was informed that the investigation fell under federal jurisdiction, and their assistance was not required. But the federal team could not explain the most troubling evidence uncovered that morning. Electronic equipment throughout the facility showed signs of massive electromagnetic interference that had occurred between 2:15 a.m. and 2:45 a.m. Sensitive instruments designed to detect radio signals from satellites had recorded what technicians described as impossible readings, electromagnetic pulses that exceeded the theoretical output of any known terrestrial source. The interference had been so intense that it temporarily disabled the facility's primary power grid, triggering backup generators and causing a brief communications blackout. During this 30-minute window, every electronic surveillance system had malfunctioned simultaneously. When the systems reset at 2:47 a.m., Dr. Elena Vasquez was no longer anywhere within the Walker Lake installation's 12-square-mile perimeter. Her car was found running on a road she should never have accessed, in a location the facility's security systems insisted she had never reached. As federal agents began their classified investigation, one question dominated every conversation among the facility's personnel. What had generated electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to overwhelm military-grade equipment? And what connection did those pulses have to the disappearance of Dr. Elena Vasquez? On the morning of March 14th, 24 hours after Dr. Vasquez's disappearance, Rosa Begay was checking on her family's cattle near the traditional grazing areas south of Walker Lake. As a member of the Walker River Paiute tribe and the Tribal Environmental Protection Coordinator, Begay was intimately familiar with the region's natural rhythms and seasonal changes. What she witnessed that morning was neither natural nor seasonal. According to her subsequent statement to tribal authorities, Begay observed unusual light patterns above the sacred sites along Walker Lake's eastern shore sometime around dawn. The lights appeared as horizontal bands of blue-white illumination that pulsed in regular intervals, lasting approximately 30 seconds before disappearing entirely. They weren't stars, they weren't aircraft navigation lights, and they weren't reflections off the lake, Begay later explained to tribal council members. These lights moved in patterns that defied explanation, appearing to scan the landscape like searchlights, but from no visible source. Begay's observation became significant when cross-referenced with reports from other tribal members in the area. Between March 12th and 13th, at least 4 separate witnesses reported unusual aerial phenomena in the vicinity of Walker Lake. The consistency of their descriptions, horizontal light patterns, regular pulsing, duration of 30 to 40 seconds, suggested the reports were documenting the same events. When Mineral County Sheriff Maria Santos learned of Dr. Vasquez's disappearance through unofficial channels, she immediately recognized the jurisdictional complexities involved. The Walker Lake installation occupied federal land, but the access road where Dr. Vasquez's vehicle was discovered crossed through areas subject to tribal treaty rights established in the 1930s. We had a missing person case that involved federal facilities, tribal sovereignty, and state jurisdiction all within a 5-mile radius, Sheriff Santos later explained in an interview with Nevada State Police investigators. It was a legal maze even before the federal agents started classifying everything. Sheriff Santos's attempts to coordinate with federal authorities met immediate resistance. When she requested access to investigate the vehicle discovery site, she was informed that the matter fell entirely under federal jurisdiction and that local law enforcement assistance was unnecessary. When she asked to interview facility personnel as potential witnesses, she was told that all personnel were subject to national security restrictions that prohibited cooperation with local authorities. The federal position created an unusual situation. A missing person case where local law enforcement was prohibited from conducting standard investigative procedures. No witness interviews, no crime scene access, no coordination with family members or colleagues who might provide relevant information. In 20 years of law enforcement, I had never encountered a missing person case where federal agencies refused to share basic information with local authorities, Sheriff Santos stated in her official report to the Nevada Attorney General's office. Their level of secrecy was completely disproportionate to standard missing person protocols. The situation became more complex when tribal authorities asserted their own jurisdictional claims. Rosa Begay's research into the area's legal status revealed that portions of the land where unusual lights had been observed fell within boundaries protected by the Walker River Paiute tribe's treaty rights. Federal testing activities in these areas required tribal consultation under the National Environmental Policy Act. Tribal Chairman Robert Anderson requested records of any federal testing activities that might have affected traditional sacred sites during the period of Dr. Vasquez's disappearance. The request was denied under national security provisions, but federal authorities could not legally prevent tribal members from conducting their own environmental monitoring on treaty-protected lands. This created what legal experts later described as a jurisdictional standoff. Federal agencies claimed complete authority over the investigation while refusing to share information with local law enforcement. Tribal authorities asserted treaty rights to monitor environmental impacts, while being denied access to relevant federal testing data. Local law enforcement maintained responsibility for missing person cases within county boundaries while being blocked from accessing key evidence. The standoff intensified when tribal environmental monitors detected elevated electromagnetic radiation levels in areas where tribal members had reported unusual lights. The readings, recorded using handheld detection equipment, showed electromagnetic signatures consistent with high-powered radar or communication arrays operating at frequencies far exceeding normal background levels. What we found was evidence of electromagnetic pollution in areas where our people have conducted traditional ceremonies for generations. Rosa Begay explained to the tribal council. Federal agencies were conducting activities that potentially violated both environmental protection laws and our treaty rights, and they were refusing to provide any information about what those activities involved. The discovery of electromagnetic anomalies on tribal lands raised the possibility that Dr. Vasquez's disappearance was connected to testing activities that extended beyond the federal facility's official boundaries. If federal projects were operating in areas subject to tribal oversight, her disappearance might have occurred in a location where multiple agencies could legitimately claim investigative authority. But federal authorities continued to maintain that all aspects of the case fell under national security classification. No information would be shared with local law enforcement, tribal authorities, or even Dr. Vasquez's family members who were attempting to understand what had happened to their daughter, sister, and colleague. As the investigation entered its third day, the jurisdictional disputes had created a situation where multiple agencies were working on the same case while being prohibited from sharing information with each other. The search for Dr. Elena Vasquez had become secondary to a legal battle over who had the authority to conduct the search. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years building a reputation as one of the defense industry's most skilled radar systems engineers. Her expertise in experimental detection technology had made her a sought-after contractor for projects that pushed the boundaries of what conventional electronics could accomplish. Born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in 1980, Elena had earned her electrical engineering degree from the University of New Mexico, before pursuing doctoral studies in electromagnetic theory at Stanford University. Her dissertation, titled Atmospheric Manipulation of Long-Range Radar Signatures, had caught the attention of Defense Department recruiters who recognized the military applications of her research. By 2015, Dr. Vasquez was working on classified projects at facilities throughout Nevada's test site region. Her security clearance allowed access to experimental radar systems that remained decades ahead publicly acknowledged technology. Colleagues described her as brilliant, but increasingly concerned about the ethical implications of her work. Dr. James Patterson, who worked with Elena on 3 separate projects between 2018 and 2022, later provided investigators with insight into her professional mindset during her final years as a contractor. Elena was passionate about the science, but she struggled with how the technology was being implemented, Patterson explained in a statement to federal authorities. She believed radar systems should be used for scientific research and civilian applications, not just military superiority. Elena's personnel files, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests filed by her family, revealed a pattern of increasing concern about project oversight and environmental impact assessments. In 2021, she had submitted formal questions about whether experimental radar testing was being conducted in compliance with federal environmental regulations, particularly regarding electromagnetic emissions that might affect wildlife and nearby communities. The questions were dismissed by project supervisors as outside her area of responsibility, but Elena continued to document what she perceived as regulatory violations. Her personal journals, recovered from her apartment in Reno after her disappearance, contained detailed technical notes about electromagnetic radiation levels that exceeded Environmental Protection Agency guidelines. Entry dated February 18, 2023. Nighthawk array producing electromagnetic radiation readings, 300% above established safety thresholds. No environmental impact study on file. Project timeline suggests testing began without required tribal consultation. Legal compliance appears secondary to operational objectives. Nimsrani. Elena's concerns extended beyond regulatory compliance to the fundamental purpose of the technology she was helping to develop. Her journals revealed growing discomfort with military applications that she believed violated international agreements regarding atmospheric manipulation and electromagnetic warfare. Entry dated March 3, 2023. If Nighthawk operates as designed, it represents capabilities that blur the line between defensive radar and active electromagnetic weapon systems. Current testing protocols suggest intended applications far beyond stated defensive purposes. Don't worry. Most significantly, Elena's research had led her to believe that the Walker Lake installation was conducting experiments that affected areas beyond federal property boundaries. Her analysis of electromagnetic propagation patterns suggested that high-powered radar testing was creating environmental impacts on tribal lands and potentially affecting civilian communities as far as 50 miles from the facility. Investigators discovered that Elena had been in communication with environmental lawyers and tribal rights advocates in the weeks before her disappearance. Encrypted email records, partially recovered by federal authorities, showed that she had been preparing documentation that could support legal challenges to the Walker Lake installation's testing activities. On March 8, 4 days before her disappearance, Elena had contacted the Walker River Paiute Tribe's Environmental Protection Office. Phone records show a 17-minute conversation with Coordinator Rosa Begay, though the content of that conversation was protected by attorney-client privilege that Elena had established through environmental lawyers. Elena's sister, Dr. Maria Vasquez Chen, a family physician in Phoenix, later described Elena's state of mind during their final conversation on March 10th. She seemed stressed but determined, Maria recalled. She said she was going to Walker Lake for what might be her final contract work there. She mentioned something about setting the record straight, but she couldn't discuss details because of her security clearance. Federal investigators found evidence that Elena had been documenting safety violations and environmental impacts for months before her disappearance. Her apartment contained copies of electromagnetic radiation readings, photographs of equipment installations, and technical analyses that suggested testing activities were producing effects far beyond what had been authorized or disclosed to oversight agencies. Most disturbing to investigators was Elena's final encrypted email, sent on March 11th to an undisclosed recipient. The message, partially decoded by federal cybersecurity specialists, included the phrase, "If something happens to me," and referenced technical data that had been secured in multiple locations for legal protection. The email suggested that Elena had anticipated potential retaliation for her whistleblowing activities and had taken precautions to ensure her documentation would survive any attempts to silence her concerns. Federal authorities never publicly acknowledged the content of Elena's documentation or the legal implications of her research. However, personnel changes at the Walker Lake installation in the months following her disappearance suggested that her concerns about regulatory compliance and environmental impact had been taken seriously at the highest levels of the Defense Department. The question that remained unanswered was whether Elena's disappearance was connected to her role as a potential whistleblower, or whether her knowledge of the installation's experimental capabilities had made her a target for those who wanted to prevent disclosure of classified activities that violated federal environmental and tribal treaty obligations. As investigators would later discover, the answer to that question was hidden in the electromagnetic anomalies that had occurred during Elena's final night at the Walker Lake installation. The morning after Dr. Elena Vasquez vanished from the Walker Lake facility, the technical evidence began to tell a story that defied conventional explanation. According to facility maintenance logs recovered 3 days later, the primary radar array had recorded unprecedented signal patterns beginning at 11:34 p.m. on March 12th, just 13 minutes before Elena's last confirmed communication. Chief Technician Marcus Webb, who analyzed the data for federal investigators, described readings that should have been impossible with the equipment in use. The frequency modulation showed patterns we'd never seen, Webb stated in his official report. The signals appeared to be responding to themselves, creating feedback loops that our systems weren't designed to generate. It was as if something was communicating back to us. Oh, my. The radar logs showed 3 distinct phases of anomalous activity. First, between 11:34 and 11:41 p.m., the array detected what appeared to be solid objects moving at impossible speeds, over 3,000 miles per hour, in erratic flight patterns above Walker Lake. The objects appeared and disappeared from the scope in ways that violated known physics. During the second phase from 11:41 to 11:47 p.m., the facility's communication systems began experiencing systematic interference. Radio frequencies across multiple bands became completely saturated with what technicians described as structured noise, patterns that seemed intentional rather than random. The base's satellite uplink failed completely at 11:43 p.m. The final phase began at 11:47 p.m., the exact moment of Elena's last recorded transmission. Every electronic system within a 12-mile radius of the facility experienced simultaneous malfunction, not just at the military installation, but throughout the sparse civilian population of Mineral County. 15 miles away in the town of Hawthorne, amateur radio operator. 40 years I've been running radio, Brennan told county investigators. Never seen anything like it. Every frequency from shortwave to UHF went completely dead. Like someone threw a switch and turned off the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah, I don't know. The blackout affected more than just communications. The Nevada Seismological Laboratory, which maintains monitoring stations throughout the region, recorded unusual ground vibrations beginning at 11:52 p.m. Dr. Patricia Huang, the laboratory's director, described the readings as inconsistent with any known geological phenomenon. And the vibrations showed a regular pattern, Dr. Huang explained in her analysis. Pulses every 3.7 seconds, lasting exactly 1.2 seconds each. This continued for 17 minutes before stopping as abruptly as it began. Natural seismic events don't follow such precise timing. Perhaps most disturbing were the electromagnetic readings collected by the facility's atmospheric monitoring equipment. The data suggested massive electrical activity in the upper atmosphere directly above Walker Lake, activity that created no visible lightning and produced no thunder, but registered magnetic field fluctuations typically associated with solar storms. Meteorologist Dr. James Morrison, brought in to analyze the atmospheric data, found the readings deeply troubling. The electromagnetic signature was consistent with artificial atmospheric manipulation, he stated in his report to federal authorities. The energy levels required would be beyond current acknowledged human technology. We're talking about the ability to ionize massive volumes of air in controlled patterns. Now, the facility's security cameras, which had been recording continuously, captured only the first few minutes of the anomalous activity before failing completely. The recovered footage showed the radar array's massive dish rotating erratically, its movements seemingly independent of the control systems. Bright flashes illuminated the desert landscape, not from above, but appearing to originate from the ground itself. By dawn on March 13th, most systems had returned to normal operation, but the electromagnetic interference continued in subtle ways. Radio reception throughout Mineral County remained spotty. Cell phone service experienced frequent dropouts. The facility's own communication array required complete recalibration. Federal investigators classified all technical data within hours of arriving on scene. The equipment logs, atmospheric readings, and seismic data were declared part of ongoing national security operations. Local authorities were prohibited from discussing the technical findings. Yet questions persisted among the technicians who had witnessed the event firsthand. Marcus Webb, the chief technician, resigned from his position 2 weeks later. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "The equipment performed exactly as designed. The readings were accurate. What we recorded that night was real, whatever it was." The precise timing of the electromagnetic anomalies, beginning just before Elena's disappearance and ending shortly after, suggested a connection that federal authorities refused to acknowledge publicly. Whether the phenomena had caused Elena's vanishing, or whether her disappearance had somehow triggered the electronic chaos, remained an officially unanswered question. But for those who had witnessed the technical evidence firsthand, the conclusion was inescapable. Something had occurred at Walker Lake on the night of March 12th that challenged fundamental assumptions about electromagnetic physics, atmospheric science, and the boundaries of current human technology. And Dr. Q. Elena Vasquez had vanished at the exact moment when those boundaries appeared to have been crossed. 3 days after Dr. Elena Vasquez's disappearance, Rosa Begay sat across from Mineral County investigators in the tribal offices of the Walker River Paiute Reservation. As the tribe's environmental protection coordinator, she had been reluctant to speak with law enforcement about the events at Walker Lake. The reservation bordered the military testing facility, and the relationship between tribal authorities and federal agencies had been strained for decades. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that place," Rosa told deputies during the March 15th interview. "She called it the place where the sky touches the earth. Said it wasn't meant for machines and concrete." Rosa's grandmother, Mary Begay, had lived through the atomic testing era in Nevada. She had witnessed the government's appropriation of sacred sites for military purposes, seen traditional hunting grounds transformed into restricted zones. The Walker Lake testing facility was just the latest in a long series of federal installations that ignored tribal sovereignty and cultural significance. According to Rosa, the area around Walker Lake held particular importance in Paiute oral tradition. The lake itself was considered a spiritual threshold, a place where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected. Traditional ceremonies had been conducted on its shores for centuries before the military arrived. "The old ones knew about the lights," Rosa explained to investigators. "They were part of the sacred stories, part of what made that place powerful. But they were supposed to be welcomed properly, with ceremony and respect, not forced to appear with machines and electricity." Tribal records, maintained in both written form and oral tradition, documented unusual phenomena in the Walker Lake region dating back over 200 years. Paiute hunters had reported mysterious lights above the alkaline waters, sounds that seemed to come from beneath the earth, and areas where compass needles spun wildly without explanation. Most significantly, tribal historians had noted a pattern of disappearances in the area long before any military installation existed. Hunting parties that ventured too close to certain sections of the lakeshore sometimes returned missing members. The missing individuals were never found, but survivors reported stories remarkably similar to what had occurred on March 12th. Strange lights, electronic interference affecting metal objects, and an overwhelming sense that they were being observed. "Our people learned to avoid certain areas during certain times," Rosa told investigators. "There were protocols, times of year when the spirits were too active. The military never asked about any of this. They just moved in and started their testing." The jurisdictional complexities surrounding Elena's disappearance became more apparent as tribal involvement increased. The Walker Lake testing facility sat on land that had been ceded to the federal government in 1859, but the boundaries had been disputed ever since. Portions of the installation potentially extended onto territory that remained under tribal sovereignty. This created significant legal complications for the federal investigation. While the FBI claimed exclusive jurisdiction over the case, tribal police argued that any search efforts extending beyond the immediate facility required tribal permission and oversight. The dispute effectively paralyzed parts of the investigation for nearly a week. During this jurisdictional standoff, Rosa Begay made a discovery that changed the trajectory of the case. While reviewing environmental impact studies related to the military facility, she found evidence that Dr. Elena Vasquez had been attempting to contact the tribal environmental office in the weeks before her disappearance. Elena had submitted a formal inquiry on February 18th, requesting information about traditional ecological knowledge related to Walker Lake's electromagnetic properties. Her inquiry specifically mentioned unexplained energy patterns and potential environmental impacts on culturally sensitive areas. The Tribal Environmental Office had scheduled a meeting with Elena for March 20th, a meeting that would never take place. She was trying to understand what was happening out there, Rosa said. She knew the testing was affecting more than just the equipment. She wanted to know what our people had experienced in that area. Further investigation revealed that Elena had been conducting unauthorized research into the facility's environmental impact on surrounding tribal lands. Her personal laptop, recovered from her apartment, contained dozens of files documenting electromagnetic readings, wildlife behavior changes, and water quality data from Walker Lake. Most troubling was Elena's discovery that the military testing had been affecting the lake's delicate ecosystem in ways that hadn't been disclosed in official environmental assessments. Fish populations had declined dramatically since testing began. Migratory birds had altered their flight patterns to avoid the area. Even the chemical composition of the lake water showed changes that suggested artificial electromagnetic manipulation. Tribal attorney David Winnemucca reviewed Elena's research and found clear evidence of environmental law violations. The testing facility was required to consult with tribal authorities about any activities that might affect reservation resources, Winnemucca stated. That consultation never happened. Dr. Vasquez had documented years of unauthorized environmental impact. The federal response to tribal involvement was swift and decisive. On March 18th, federal agents informed tribal authorities that Elena's research was classified under national security provisions. All environmental data related to the Walker Lake facility was declared sensitive information, subject to federal oversight. Rosa Begay's request to conduct traditional ceremonies at Walker Lake to help locate Elena was denied. Federal authorities cited security concerns and classified testing operations. The denial effectively prevented tribal spiritual leaders from accessing an area they considered sacred. They want us to stay silent about what we know, Rosa told tribal council members during a closed session on March 20th. But this isn't just about one missing woman. This is about respecting the spiritual significance of our ancestral lands and protecting our people from whatever they're doing out there. The intersection of federal authority, military secrecy, and tribal sovereignty had created a complex web of competing interests that seemed designed to prevent, rather than facilitate, the search for Elena Vasquez. As the investigation continued, it became clear that understanding Elena's disappearance might require acknowledging knowledge that the federal government preferred to keep buried. 6 months after Dr. Elena Vasquez vanished from the Walker Lake facility, the official investigation reached its conclusion. On September 8, 2023, federal authorities released a 2-page summary stating that the case had been closed due to insufficient evidence to determine the circumstances of Dr. Vasquez's departure from the facility. The report made no mention of the electromagnetic anomalies, the tribal concerns, or the classified research that Elena had been conducting. But the silence from federal investigators only deepened the mystery surrounding Elena's final hours at the facility. 2 weeks before the case was officially closed, a breakthrough had seemed possible. Computer forensics specialists working for Elena's family had partially decoded one of her encrypted messages, a transmission sent to an unknown recipient at 11:42 p.m. on March 12th, just 5 minutes before her final recorded communication. The message, recovered from backup servers, contained a single line of text. The frequency signature matches historical patterns. They know we're watching now. Implementation tomorrow night regardless of environmental impact assessment. The meaning of Elena's message remained opaque, but its timing was significant. The transmission occurred during the second phase of the electromagnetic anomalies, when communication systems throughout the region were experiencing systematic interference. Somehow, Elena had managed to send an encrypted message during a period when most electronic communication was impossible. Even more puzzling was the identity of the message recipient. The encryption indicated that Elena was communicating with someone outside the military facility, but federal investigators refused to reveal whether they had identified the recipient or attempted to trace the message's destination. Security footage from Elena's final night provided additional tantalizing clues, but raised more questions than it answered. The facility's exterior cameras had captured approximately 6 minutes of activity before succumbing to the electromagnetic interference. The footage showed Elena leaving the main control building at 11:40 p.m., walking purposefully toward the radar array. Her movements appeared deliberate rather than distressed. She carried what appeared to be a handheld device, possibly a frequency analyzer or communication equipment, and paused several times to take readings or measurements. At 11:43 p.m., the footage captured the beginning of the light phenomena that had been reported by witnesses throughout Mineral County. Brilliant flashes illuminated the desert landscape, but the lights appeared to originate from ground level rather than the sky. Elena could be seen in the final frames, standing near the base of the radar array, looking upward at something beyond the camera's range. Then the cameras failed, and Elena Vasquez disappeared from the historical record. The federal investigation's conclusion satisfied no one familiar with the case. Mineral County Sheriff Maria Santos expressed frustration with the lack of federal cooperation and the classification of critical evidence. "We had a missing person case that became a national security matter overnight," Sheriff Santos stated in a press conference following the case closure. The federal authorities made it clear from day one that local law enforcement was not welcome in this investigation. Rosa Begay and the Walker River Paiute Tribal Council continued to pursue their own investigation into Elena's disappearance and its connection to ongoing military testing. Tribal attorneys filed federal court challenges to the environmental impact assessments for the Walker Lake facility, arguing that Elena's research had documented violations of federal environmental and tribal consultation laws. Dr. Vasquez was trying to expose something that the military wanted to keep hidden, Rosa stated during a tribal council meeting in October 2023. Her disappearance silenced the one person who had documented the true impact of their testing on our sacred lands. The electromagnetic interference that had begun on the night of Elena's disappearance never fully resolved. Radio operators throughout Mineral County continued to report periodic communication blackouts, particularly during the early morning hours around 11:47 p.m., the exact time of Elena's final transmission. Carl Brennan, the amateur radio operator who had first documented the frequency blackout, maintained detailed logs of the ongoing interference patterns. His records showed that the electromagnetic disturbances followed a predictable schedule, occurring every 27 days in cycles that lasted exactly 17 minutes. "Whatever they activated out there that night, it's still running," Brennan told local reporters in November 2023. "The pattern is too regular to be natural, too precise to be equipment malfunction. Something is still operating at that frequency." The Nevada Seismological Laboratory continued to detect the unusual ground vibrations that had begun on March 12. Dr. Patricia Huang's ongoing analysis showed that the seismic patterns had become more complex over time, as if the original phenomenon was evolving or adapting. "The vibrations now show harmonic structures," Dr. Huang reported to state environmental authorities. "Multiple frequencies operating in coordination, creating patterns that suggest intentional design rather than random geological activity." Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Elena's research had been far more extensive than initially realized. In December 2023, her former colleague Dr. Sarah Chan found additional encrypted files on a university server that Elena had been using for backup storage. The files contained detailed analysis of electromagnetic patterns recorded at military facilities throughout Nevada, dating back 15 years. Elena had been tracking similar anomalies at installations near Area 51, the Nevada test site, and other classified locations. Her research suggested that the Walker Lake incident was part of a larger pattern of unexplained electromagnetic activity associated with government testing. The final file in Elena's research, dated March 11th, one day before her disappearance, contained a single notation. "Pattern acceleration indicates imminent threshold event. Recommend immediate cessation of artificial frequency manipulation. Natural resonance systems approaching critical instability." 1 year after Elena Vasquez vanished from the Walker Lake facility, The questions surrounding her disappearance remained unanswered. Federal authorities maintained their official position that insufficient evidence existed to determine what had happened to her. The military testing at Walker Lake continued under enhanced security protocols that prohibited civilian access to the area. But in the high desert of Mineral County, strange lights still appeared over Walker Lake on clear nights. Radio frequencies still experienced periodic blackouts, and Rosa Begay still watched the sky, remembering her grandmother's warnings about the place where the sky touches the earth. Somewhere in the vast Nevada desert, the midnight frequency continues to broadcast its mysterious signal, carrying secrets that may never be fully understood, and questions that may never be answered.